I'm Beverly Hosford, and I'm here with Erin Nitschke. We're live on the National Federation of Professional Trainers Facebook page. We are a personal training certification company and a family of trainers. We do our best to take care of our trainers in all things business, science, continuing education, and anything they need. So we're glad to be here today. How are you doing today, Erin?
I'm good. I'm pretty good. I'm on the tail end of some sort of respiratory thing, but whatever. It's all good. How are you?
Yeah, you had that going on last week, and
yeah,
I feel like I've just been keeping something at bay for a week now, just like keeping it under the covers. And
yeah, don't get me.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it
you or what?
But
yeah, what do you do when you're feeling under the weather to help support your immune system?
I try to make sure that I'm well hydrated. I mean, food or fluids are never a bad thing. I try to get as much rest as possible. It's a little difficult to do with a toddler running around, but we try to do some relaxing activities and get as much rest as possible. But my main thing, I always do like hot water, lemon, and honey to soothe the sore throat and kind of keep your cough to a minimum. And it really does help. And then, it's not full of caffeine or anything like that, so it's not going to keep you awake. But sometimes, with a virus, I just sometimes let it run its course. There's not a lot we can do about it. So
yeah. Do you still exercise when you're sick?
I do. I try to take it a little bit lighter. This past weekend I didn't, which is totally abnormal for me. I usually only take about 1 day off a week as active rest. But sometimes when your body is just, if you really have to convince yourself to do it, it's just not worth it because you're just, to some degree, you're going to impact the immune system negatively for that period of time. And so just letting it rest, I binge watch Netflix sometimes just to kind of get through it. But I do still try to be somewhat active, but I mostly just listen to my body. If it's telling me you just don't have it today, then I just let it go. I'm like, you know what? It's fine. This too shall pass, and I'll be back to doing whatever crazy thing I do. So
isn't it true? It does. Hopefully it always passes. If it doesn't, then I guess you're passing.
Yeah. True. Very true.
Sweet. Well, hello everybody. If you're here, please say hi. And we're talking about a touchy topic today, touching. So in the fitness industry, I personally feel that there's no way you could be a personal trainer and not touch people or not be comfortable with it. But I know companies, especially like ours, National Federation of Professional Trainers, and companies like American Council on Exercise and National Conditioning and Strength Foundation, and ACSM, I think they all find it hard to create guidelines around touching, because as soon as you tell someone it's okay to touch, then you're under liability. And I've heard some folks say, like, the trainers just shouldn't touch clients. And I even had someone in one of my sessions at Idea World this summer who was upset that I had the trainers touching each other in the workshop. And it was an anatomy workshop, and we were learning about corrective exercise and muscles. And I was like, how can we possibly learn about muscles if you're not willing to touch people? And I think the only thing worse would be a massage therapist that didn't touch people. But with personal training, I feel like, we need to be able to touch. So today we're going to talk a little bit about touching, about when to touch, when not to touch. And I see, I think John is either here or this popped up already. He says, are they okay with it? In what context are you touching them? Is it flirtatious or assistive? If you're guiding them through a range of motion, that's one thing. But if you're running your hand on a thigh and telling them they're hot, yeah. I think that we can all agree with that, John. And I don't know who it would be that would think that's okay, but I'm willing to bet that there are some people who get certified and may think it's a way to pick up people. I wouldn't put it past. It's just, you never know. So yeah, thanks, John. That pretty much sums it up. So I don't think we need to have a show now. No, I'm just
and that's all, folks.
But I kind of want to run through some of the different arenas and where touching might happen. Like the first one to me is going to be shaking someone's hand maybe when you meet them. Mm-hmm. And then from there, to me, a lot of times the fitness assessments might be the first time, which
Mm-hmm.
especially like a body composition assessment, that can be a little bit much for someone. So I often would tell my students and trainers not to do that in the first session, to touch the tummy or the buttocks, like, because there's no way to measure someone without touching them.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And I think that's one thing I would tell my students too. Often that first session is it's not to get right into everything. It's an introductory kind of session. So you get to meet this person, you kind of gather some information about what brought them to you, what they're looking for, what their motivation is. So you can determine, are they externally motivated? Are they internally motivated? And what your approach is going to be. And when I would conduct labs with my students to do fitness assessments, there isn't any way for you to do it without having some sort of physical contact with them. But what I do with my students and with clients is I will explain to them, okay, these are the battery of assessments that we can do if I feel like this person just needs a few things, because not every client is going to need every single assessment that's available out there. Most of your clients won't. But if you're going to do like a body composition or waist to hip, then we talk about how to approach it in such a way that it is appropriate and it's professional, and you don't kind of put that person on that kind of insecure ledge of, oh my gosh, what are they going to do? You don't come right at them with skin fold calipers and start pinching away. You explain the process. Yeah. Hi. They're going to be out the door super fast. And I honestly wouldn't blame them. But we talk about, I'll show them pictures of like, okay, so this is the 3-site skin fold. This is where the landmark is on the body. We typically will run through 2 measurements. If the measurements are so far apart, then we'll do a third and average the 3, that type of thing. And I explain to the clients, like, this is how this assessment would go. And I would give them that option. If you're in any way uncomfortable with something like this, there are other options, or we don't even have to approach this right now. But just so kind of you educate them on that piece. And one of the things that I would have my students do too is when we would do waist to hip, of course you've got the measuring tape, and obviously the hips are located lower on the body. So don't come at them like at a full frontal, like approach them from the side. And we talk about like how not to be all up in their business and all up in their face about it, like making sure that you approach it in a gentle, appropriate way, similar to, what you would do if you went to the doctor. There's a certain amount of physical contact that has to happen if you're going to gather some data about this person, to be able to really effectively plan a program for them. But there are ways you can do it that's not intimidating, that's not like you have to do this, and it's not them standing there in, a Speedo or something and getting, pinched all over. That's not what it has to be. And so I think there's a lot of ways to teach it, but to some degree, it's absolutely necessary that you touch a client.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know. You can't even really get around that, that aspect of it. Just make sure my thing isn't dinging.
Yeah, I heard a ding too, but I wasn't sure if it was on my end or not. So I just made sure my email was closed.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I don't even know how to. Oh, here we go. I think it might have been mine. Sorry about that. So yeah, I love that. I love, even if you're not trying to be inappropriate, it can be perceived that way. Like you might be, like you said, just coming at them from the front and reaching for their hips. And yeah, I always go from the side. I'm trying to see where the butt is, because you've got to see the biggest part of the butt in order to measure the hip properly. So I always go from the side anyway. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and doing the waist, certainly you're down there like staring them in the belly button. So
right.
It'd be good to. So a couple tips is to just either put it off to a later session when you've gotten to know each other better, or just like you said, talk them through it, educate them, and make sure you ask every single time before you touch. Not just like, is it okay if I take these measurements, but okay, I'm going to touch you here now. I'm going to put these here. I'm going to, just walking them through it as if you were teaching it pretty much. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the easiest ways to approach it with a client. And I think another thing, and what I will tell my students as well is, there are times where a female client may have a male trainer and maybe she doesn't want him doing that. And just to make sure you're within your own, liability and making sure that you're not doing anything that could be perceived as inappropriate, because people will take things and just like run wild with them. And then all of a sudden it's this dumpster fire and we don't even know how it got started. So, you know, you can have another trainer that is a female that could take those measurements for you. If you feel comfortable and competent in her skill set, or if you feel that she's competent in her skill set, you could certainly do that and offer that to the client. If you are a male trainer and you feel like there's maybe a little bit of a barrier there with having a female client, especially one that might have some body image concerns, you know, you can have that emotional sensitivity. And I think that's necessary when you're working with anybody. I don't care if it's male or female, but just having that emotional intelligence to know this is how I'm going to conduct it with this person. And sometimes you can get a pretty good feel for how someone might react to something like that in your first few times with them. So you could easily pass it off to another trainer that's there that they might feel a little bit more comfortable with.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that as much, being that I'm a female trainer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like it is, for some reason, it's a little more comfortable for a female to measure a male. Yeah. And a male to measure a female. It's just intuitively that way. And yeah, for male trainers, I think you definitely, maybe they just have to be a little more cautious before, touching a female, for sure. And the other way around too. But I think generally, for some reason, that just seems a little more touchy. So yeah. So the measurements. So if anybody has any questions about measurements, definitely jump in there and ask us. I think that the next part then is like the session. So there's a lot of different reasons you might touch someone in a session. You might be trying to correct their form. You might be patting them on the back because they did a good job. Mm-hmm. You might be moving. Like I sometimes, when I got more comfortable with clients, like I sometimes might guide them to where we're going next just by putting a hand on their shoulder or something, like just casually, like, cause that's just what I do with anybody. I'm Italian. I use my hands a lot, touch people. I remember when I went and taught anatomy at an art school for a while, just for fun and business. And I remember I put my hand on one of the students' shoulders once and they did that, you know? Don't touch me. And I was like, oh, that's right. I'm in a whole different environment here. I'm used to being around personal trainer, people who want to learn about the human body. And even in that demographic, there are people who are uncomfortable with it. So you said, and maybe that's a good question to ask in your intake interview, is just like, how do you feel about being touched? I like to correct form. I like to use my hands to take measurements. You could just ask somebody, or you could just ask them when it comes up. But so in the session, for me, I feel like I was always very hands-on with people, just in lots of different ways. But the one I think that's the most important is correcting form.
For sure. Yeah, I think especially if you have a client that's really more that kinesthetic type of learner, where maybe giving them a verbal cue isn't enough for them to actually feel it or have that body awareness. And so oftentimes, I would always tell my clients, this is how I approach correcting form. Occasionally I will, press down on your shoulders if I notice that they start to creep up to your ears. Shoulders down and back, slide the shoulder blades down. Or like if I notice that they're not stepping wide enough in a lunge, I might use my foot to say, I want you to scoot your back heel back until you touch my foot, or something like that. Like, there's a lot of exercises where you need to cue for, keep the chest up, keep your eye line forward, or make sure that your belly is in, or something like that. And sometimes if I had a client that was just kind of one of those that wasn't real comfortable with that, I would just like put my hand someplace, on my own body. So I'd be standing in a mirror next to them, shoulders down. Or I'd, put my hand in front of their stomach without touching it and say, make sure that you're pulling your belly button towards your spine, keep those abs tight, or something like that. So there's a lot of ways that you can cue exercise, but I think, to some degree it is really important that you ask them, can I adjust your arm? I need to adjust your arm because I want you to feel it in this way versus where you're feeling it now. Especially if you ask a client, where are you feeling this? And they say it's someplace that we're not even working that area. What are you doing wrong? Let me adjust something on you, whether it's your hips or your back, or maybe, they're using momentum in some way, or they're leaning too far forward, any number of things. So I think, things like that. It's very important to correct form. But I think you still have to have that sensitivity of how's this client going to feel about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And always treat it like a first date, like just always ask, no matter how long you've been working with someone, because you never know what kind of mood they're in on a particular day. I mean, I know I don't want to be touched some days. I'm just like, I'm in the baby all day long, and then my husband comes home, puts a hand on me, and I'm like, oh, no more touching. Just everybody leave me alone. Yeah, I understand that more than ever. And I love touch. I think human touch is so powerful. I love getting massages. I think it's a very healing quality, and it's something we need. I think I read one time that you need like 6 hugs a day to survive. Like 20 to thrive or something like that. I mean, so I'm all about touch, but I get it now as a mama. Like sometimes you're just like, I need some personal space, please. Right. So you never know, that client that was okay with you touching them yesterday may not be today. And I think, correcting form. And I do want to mention, while we're talking about correcting form, that I always would teach my students, like, so if you want someone to put your shoulders down, instead of putting your hands on top of their shoulders, to put your fingertips like below the scapula and tell them to push down, because our tendency is to, like push into wherever you're touching. That's something that I always teach when I'm teaching anatomy too, is like, or just point to the muscle belly or touch the muscle belly and tell them to contract it. And that's, again, a place where you have to ask, but maybe because of my anatomy workshops, it's something we've really gotten into with students, because I encourage them to educate the client on the muscle. Where do you feel it? I mean, mindfulness is in the forefront of our industry right now. And I don't know how you can be mindful without knowing where your muscles are and knowing what you're working. So I think the best way for a trainer to educate someone on the muscles is to touch the muscle and say, this is what we're working.
Yeah. So this is where you should feel it. If you don't feel it, then that's where I think you need to come in and say, let's look at your form. That's where mirrors can be really helpful too. I mean, I don't know any gyms that don't have some set of mirrors that can allow you to watch the form, and then in turn teach your client to watch their own form. Yeah. So it's all about creating that body awareness, because it's a lot different when you tell someone, to maybe, like, if you're in a plank position and you tell them to keep their hips steady, it's a lot different to say that out loud and then to do something that, physically, where you make sure that they're not rocking their pelvis back and forth. Mm-hmm. It feels different. And then sometimes that is enough to make the client go, oh, okay. So this is where I should be placing my hands. They should be directly under my shoulder, or, something like that. But yeah, touch is important, but the way you approach it, I think, you always have to be mindful of that, because you're working with people. This is a people-oriented industry, and a lot of things can go awry really fast if you're not mindful of how your client will interpret that, or for that matter, how others around you will interpret it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I love all the options you give. So if a trainer, and I don't want to say that a trainer has to like touching people. Like, you don't have to like touching people to be a personal trainer, and perhaps you're the one who's uncomfortable with it. And I don't think that's a problem per se. I just think, and there's a lot of tools you can use, like mirrors, verbal cues, but certainly it can come in handy in some scenarios. And yeah, as you're saying, we're in a people industry, so touch might come into play, but you're dealing with so many different personalities, and we have to consider all of that for sure when we're talking about it.
And I think too, one of the other things, if you're not an independent contractor and you're working for some other gym, they very likely could have policies on something like that. So it's so important to know the employee handbook. Even if you're renting space from them, if their organization or that entity could in any way be perceived as liable for something that goes awry or something that is misinterpreted, as people tend to do, you need to make sure that you're aware of those policies, regardless of whether you're on their payroll or you pay a fee to them. It's just respect. It's just, and if it's not physically stated, if it's not in black and white somewhere and you're working for somebody, I would ask. You are never going to be in the wrong by asking for clarification. Like, okay, here's how I approach it. Does your organization or, management have any sort of concerns or stated policies about how we should handle something like that? Because if you're in their space, chances are they're the ones that are going to be held liable as well. I mean, they could certainly be named liable. So just thinking about that as well, and making sure that you've got those policies and procedures, because you're not gonna be able to plead ignorance. I mean, you can plead it, but it's probably not gonna work. So just make sure that you cover those bases and you know what those policies are.
Yeah, I love what you said about how other people perceive it, because even just another trainer watching you or another client might be looking at you and thinking, I want to train with them, but they might feel you're touching their clients too much. So it's definitely, there's a lot to think about with this topic. And I personally think that how much you touch a client could make or break your success as a trainer. I mean, I think that some like correcting form and showing anatomy and all those things, they could put you aside from someone else. But at the same time, if you're touching someone who doesn't want to be, it can put you in a whole different category. So I think you just got to go one client at a time and think about yourself, like whether you're comfortable with it or not, and find ways to instruct in a way that's comfortable for you and comfortable for the person. And as always, it's personal training. It's personal. So we've got to take
right in.
Got to take ourselves into consideration and then take the person. And a lot of the time it's intuitive, but it's not always intuitive. You might think you know what someone is okay with or not, and you may not actually know for sure. So
yeah, very true. I think the same can be said for making sure that you create boundaries with your clients. So it's, there's always that, like, what's an appropriate interaction and what's not. And what John mentioned in his comment about being flirtatious, like, that's pretty much just a don't do it kind of thing. Having those like personal relationships outside of the sessions, especially if it's like the opposite, like say, for example, there's a male trainer and his female client, they develop some sort of romantic relationship, or it can be that way for any, pair. But you got to be careful with those types of things. And especially if it evolves into something different than this like trainer-trainee relationship, then you need to handle that in such a way that it's not going to impact your business or your reputation. And then perhaps then you cease being that person's trainer and they go to somebody else. Because I've seen that happen in the past, and it can become a pretty slippery slope if you're not mindful of that and not careful with how you maintain that business relationship, and then it evolves into something personal. Absolutely. A very good thing to mention, because again, we are people working with people, and relationships develop, and it's definitely up to the professional to recognize when that relationship has gone beyond a professional place, and then it's time to stop this personal training relationship and now either maintain the friendship or the romantic relationship, or decide what to do, and also check with the gym policies about that. And and be trainer to trainer. I mean, even in the same facility, like you might be a more touchy person, another trainer might not. And, I would certainly like give my colleagues a pat on the back, or like if they're having a bad day, I want to give them a hug, and same thing, like it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Got to be mindful of everybody around you. Yeah, because it's not even so much about how you, like what you would do or how you would respond to that type of physical contact, but it's how those around you would respond to it. And it doesn't even have to be the person that you're working with per se. Like you said, it can be another colleague. And I'm definitely one of those people that, like, if somebody's having a bad day, like I absolutely am a hugger. I love to hug people. I just think it's like, I'm just a loving personality. And so, if my students are having a rough day or, things like that, like it's not uncommon for me to be that sympathetic individual or offer that sort of comfort. And so, yeah, you have to be ever mindful of, one, how you display your own behavior, but then how that could potentially be interpreted, because it can create unnecessary ugliness and issues in the workplace if somebody sees you just in a snapshot of some sort of context where you're giving a client a hug and then they go and like chatter to whomever is your supervisor or launch a complaint. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, this client was being sexually harassed. And it's like, well, calm down, maybe not. But unfortunately, things spiral out of control with very little investigation. It's just like, oh, let's just interpret this and then blow it up.
Yeah, too bad, because it can be the most heartfelt
Totally.
intention, and then it can be taken the wrong way by other people. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to take me to court for hugging someone, then
the world could use a little bit more love right now. I mean, that's my own interpretation.
I know, and I just feel like, yeah, people aren't touched enough. They don't feel human touch enough, and it's, hopefully a personal trainer in the right way can offer some of that touch and reassurance in an appropriate manner and be able to give that, because I feel like a pat on the back, we can all use that, or a side hug or whatever. So. Or
a high five. Like, I wouldn't go as far as good gaming someone. I mean, let's leave that on the football field. But something like that where it can be an encouraging thing, or, like, you did really great work today, or, like you said, like a client's having a really bad day. Maybe they got, yelled at by their boss and they came in with just a bad mood, and you just want to uplift their spirits. I think it can be a really well-used tool when it's used well, like when there's an intention behind it. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is correcting form as well. I mean, I find it very hard to correct form with just verbal cues unless I can, touch them or adjust a limb or, take a wider stance or, something like that. It can be really difficult for you to communicate that piece and what you want them to do without offering, okay, I'm going to just pull your shoulders back a little bit, or.
Yeah. Yeah. Like luckily today there are so many myofascial release tools that you can use. Oh. And I'm still not really sure if I like that being part of the trainer scope of practice or not. I really feel like there's something to be said for going and getting a massage that is catered to your body, where the massage therapist knows what muscle they're working on, versus like rolling your entire hip on a foam roller and you have no idea which of the like 7 lateral hip muscles you're actually, like, when my massage therapist works on me, we get down to like, which muscle is it that's actually sore right now, and just work that muscle and not the other 4 that don't need to be smashed into the femur. Anyway, there are some great tools out there if a client wants you to help them with myofascial release or loosening tension. I'm not really sure how I feel about where that is in the industry.
Yeah, it's not something I would be real comfortable with. I mean, I certainly know anatomy and physiology, but I am not a massage therapist, and I think there aren't a lot of licensure requirements in every single state for massage therapists. Like Wyoming is one, so you can go hang your shingle and say, I'm a massage therapist. So, the same with personal training. Like there's a lot of personal trainers out there that I like fitness, so I'm a personal trainer, without having that background. So I'm not personally comfortable. If I'm not licensed, I would not, I guess, perform those types of techniques, but I would make sure I had 1 or 2 massage therapists in my professional network that I would, refer clients to and say, here's what I think you need to do, or point them in the direction of a foam roller or a myofascial release tool and say, here's how you can use it. I don't feel comfortable providing you with that. Here is someone I would recommend you contact.
Yeah.
And go that route. But that's just me. I'm a little bit more conservative in that approach.
Yeah, definitely. The more I've learned about massage therapy from teaching at a massage therapy school, and the more I get massage therapy, like through pregnancy and everything, the more respect I have for the knowledge that those folks get and what they're able to do in a session. I was corresponding with someone through the NFPT this week asking for help with separated abs and trying to help him through. And it came down to like, it sounds like you really need to go and see someone that specializes. And he said, well, my insurance doesn't cover that. And I was like, sometimes spending 2 sessions with someone who knows what they're doing outside of your insurance is actually more beneficial than seeing 20 sessions at half price for physical therapists that happens to be in your network. And that's not to say that physical therapists don't do a good job. It's just that sometimes you might need to go. So anyway, long story short is that I think that it can be beneficial and if you have a client asking you to massage them, or if you have a client that just seems like they need some touch, you could send them to go see a massage therapist. So
yeah,
well, before we wrap up here, let's see. Billy's here. Hello, Billy. And Angie, do you ask the client if it's okay to touch every time? Yes, Angie, we chatted about that in the beginning. We think that no matter what, that it's a good idea to just ask. Always treat it like a first date, and because you never know what kind of mood somebody is in. So definitely, good reminder. Billy, keep personal training professional. NFPT, NF professional T.
Okay, fair point, Billy. That's a really good one. But keeping it professional.
Thanks for being here, you guys. If anybody else has any other questions before we wrap up or anything they want us to talk about, please jump on in there. And then Erin, let's figure out what we're going to talk about next week. We've got some options here. We're going to talk about firing a client, talking about communicating with clients outside of sessions, how to use technology. I think we still have some time to cover some nutrition and holiday stuff, which we're...
Yeah, I think we could wait till closer to the holidays to talk about that. But, since we are talking about touch right now, that is a form of communication. And so maybe next week we could talk about communicating with clients outside of the session and maybe how you can leverage some of the tools available to keep that relationship strong, engaged, and keep your clients motivated versus that, there are clients that you only see maybe twice a week because they're on a maintenance plan and they don't, pay for a session every 6 sessions every, 2 weeks or whatever. So we could talk about that for sure. I think that would be an important topic.
Okay. So how would you label that one?
Why you got to ask me tough questions? I'm on cold medicine right now. I'm going to have to give that some thought. I guess it depends on the direction we want to go too. Do we want to just talk about ways to use fitness apps? I just saw April's comment. Maybe asking this question on one of the forms. Yeah, Bev, you mentioned that earlier, I think was asking that in the client intake form about however you want to address it, but saying this is how I Q form, or this occasionally I'll need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And just making that, I think the more you can state it and the more you can make them aware, I think the safer it is for you and your client, so that you each go into it knowing what to expect, or you as the trainer know what you can expect to be able to do and what maybe you need to find a different way to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Here's Billy with another quote.
Billy's got a quote. You have 2 hands, one to help yourself and the second to help others. Absolutely.
I love that. Absolutely.
Yeah. April, we're on the same wavelength, girl. We were chatting about that. You could put it in a form, or you could just ask. If you put it in the form, then you're definitely not going to forget it, which is the good side about that. Sticking it in your paperwork. But it should be definitely something, like Angie was asking, it should just be something that you touch upon regularly, for sure.
Exactly.
So, I got totally lost in the mix there. So we were talking about maybe technology topic for next week.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about, I guess, question to the viewers, because they're, what would you want to see? Do you want to talk about using fitness or technology as far as apps? There are ways to communicate with clients, or, just how to approach it in general using a variety of tools. I would just be interested to know, what's rolling around in your mind? What do you want to know? What keeps you up at night wondering, how can I do my business better?
Yeah, totally. Or maybe we'll sort it out. We'll let you guys know what we decide. So since we're not getting any input, we'll figure it out and we will let you know what's coming up next week. So thanks for joining us today, everybody. We're happy to be here and share our knowledge with you and get your input when it's viable. We're here every Wednesday, 11:30 Mountain Time. And I guess we'll see you next week.
Yes, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the quotes, Billy.